There's a reason your boss talks over you in meetings while your lazy coworker gets promoted. There's a reason your ex only missed you after you went silent. And there's a disturbing psychological truth behind why being and doing you is actually sabotaging your entire life. English. What I'm about to show you will make you question everything you were taught about human nature. But before we dive into this psychological rabbit hole, hit that subscribe button because this channel is about to become your unfair advantage in a world that rewards the wrong behaviors. Trust me, you'll want to see what's coming next. Last week, a friend of mine, let's call him David, got completely destroyed in a business meeting. Not by facts, not by logic, but by silence. David came prepared with charts, data, passionate arguments about why his proposal would save the company millions. He spoke for 20 minutes straight, explaining every detail, defending every potential criticism before anyone even raised them. And you know what happened? Complete silence. Then his colleague, Andrew, who hadn't said a single word the entire meeting, simply looked up from his phone and said, "Interesting, but I have concerns." That's it, 3 words. And suddenly every head in that room turned to Andrew, waiting to hear what those concerns were. David's 20-minute presentation? Forgotten. Andrew owned that room without even trying, and I realized something that night that changed how I see human psychology forever. See, David was playing by the rules we were all taught as children. Be helpful, be open, share your ideas, prove your worth through effort and enthusiasm. But Andrew was playing by different rules entirely. Rules that most people don't even know exist, and these rules, they come from a book written 500 years ago by a man who understood human nature so well. His name became synonymous with psychological manipulation. Niccolò Machiavelli. Now, you might think you know what Machiavellianism means. Most people do. They think it's about being cruel, manipulative, evil. But that's not what Machiavelli actually taught. What he discovered about human psychology is far more subtle and far more powerful. Drop a comment right now. Have you ever noticed that the quietest person in the room often has the most influence? Because what happens next will explain exactly why that is. Here's what Machiavelli actually said, and I quote, "It is much safer to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." But here's what nobody tells you about that quote. Fear doesn't mean violence. Fear doesn't mean aggression. Fear means mystery, and mystery means power. Think about the most influential people you know personally. I'm not talking about celebrities or politicians. I mean people in your actual life who seem to effortlessly command respect. Your boss who never raises their voice, but everyone listens to. That friend who people always want to impress. That ex who had you questioning yourself for months. What do they all have in common? You can't quite figure them out, can you? There's something about them that feels unreachable. And that feeling, that inability to fully grasp who they are, that's what gives them power over your psychology. But here's where it gets disturbing. Most of us were trained to do the exact opposite. We were taught to be an open book, to wear our hearts on our sleeves, to prove our worth, by being helpful, accommodating, emotionally available. And you know what that makes us? Predictable. And what's predictable can be controlled. I learned this the hard way 3 years ago when I was working for a startup. There was this guy, let's call him Steven, who was by all accounts mediocre at his job. He showed up late, left early, rarely contributed in meetings, but somehow, he was everyone's favorite. Meanwhile, I was pulling 60-hour weeks, volunteering for extra projects, always saying yes, always being helpful. And you know what I was known as? Reliable old me. Translation: the person they could dump work on because I'd never say no. But Steven was mysterious. He'd sit in meetings, say nothing, then drop one cryptic comment that would make everyone think he knew something they didn't. He never explained his reasoning, never defended his decisions, never chased after approval, and it drove people crazy. They were obsessed with figuring him out. What was he thinking? What did he know? What was his angle? Comment below if this sounds familiar. Have you ever found yourself trying to figure out someone who never fully explained themselves? Because what Steven was doing, it wasn't an accident. There's a psychological principle called the information gap theory. When we encounter incomplete information about something we're curious about, our brains become obsessed with filling that gap. It's why cliffhangers work in TV shows, it's why people check their phones compulsively, and it's why mysterious people have more psychological influence than helpful people. Stephen understood this instinctively. By giving people just enough information to be intrigued, but never enough to feel satisfied, he created what psychologists call a cognitive loop in their minds. They literally couldn't stop thinking about him. And when people can't stop thinking about you, you have power over their attention. And attention is the currency of influence. But here's what blew my mind when I finally understood what was happening. Stephen wasn't trying to be mysterious. He wasn't following some manipulation playbook. He was just himself, naturally reserved, naturally selective about what he shared, naturally comfortable with silence. The rest of us, we were so busy trying to be liked that we made ourselves completely forgettable. And that's when I discovered something that changed everything. The problem isn't that we're too nice. The problem is that we've confused being nice with being weak. Machiavelli never said don't be good to people. He said don't let your goodness make you vulnerable. There's a massive difference. See, when most people think of Machiavellian behavior, they picture some cartoon villain rubbing their hands together, plotting everyone's downfall. But that's not what Machiavelli taught at all. What he actually taught was this: human beings respect what they can't fully control, and they take advantage of what they can. Think about your own relationships. The people who respect your boundaries are the ones who aren't sure if you'll enforce them. The people who walk all over you are the ones who know you won't. The friends who value your time are the ones who aren't sure if you'll give it freely. The ones who waste your time are those who know you always will. Your ex, who never appreciated you when you were together. The moment you stopped chasing, stopped explaining, stopped being emotionally available, suddenly they couldn't get you out of their head. If this is hitting home, make sure you're subscribed, because we're about to dive into the specific psychological tactics that will completely change how people perceive you. But first, let me tell you about the most disturbing experiment in social psychology I've ever encountered. In 1978, a researcher named Ellen Langer conducted what's now called the copy machine study. She had people try to cut in line at a busy copy machine using 3 different approaches. First approach: excuse me, I have 5 pages, may I use the copy machine? Success rate, 60%. Second approach: excuse me, I have 5 pages, may I use the copy machine because I have to make copies? Success rate, 93%. Notice anything strange about that second request? The reason given, because I have to make copies, is completely meaningless. Everyone at a copy machine has to make copies, but it worked. The third approach: excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the copy machine because I'm in a rush? Success rate, 94%. This study revealed something terrifying about human psychology. People don't actually listen to your reasons. They listen to your confidence in delivering those reasons. The people who said, because I have to make copies, weren't giving a logical argument. They were demonstrating something much more powerful. They felt entitled to what they were asking for. And that's exactly what Stephen was doing in those meetings. He wasn't being mysterious because he had secrets. He was being mysterious because he felt no need to justify his thoughts to people who hadn't earned that level of access. Meanwhile, I was like the person saying, excuse me, I have 5 pages and I know you're busy, and I really appreciate you taking the time to consider this, and I totally understand if you can't. But would it maybe be possible if it's not too much trouble? Exhausting, right? That's how most nice people communicate. We apologize for existing before we even make our request. But here's what I learned about true confidence, and this is going to sound counterintuitive. Confidence isn't believing you're better than everyone else. Confidence is being comfortable with people not understanding you. Think about that for a second. When you feel the need to explain every decision, justify every boundary, defend every choice, what are you really saying? You're saying, I need your approval to exist. And that's when people lose respect for you. Not because you're bad or weak, but because you've handed them the power to validate or invalidate your reality. I see this everywhere now. People apologizing for taking up space. explaining why they can't work overtime instead of just saying no, defending their preferences instead of simply having them. Last month, I watched a woman at a restaurant spend 5 minutes explaining to the waiter why she wanted to substitute fries for a salad. I'm trying to eat healthier, and I know it's probably a pain, and I'm sorry for the special request, but on and on and on. The waiter looked exhausted just listening to her. You know what would have been more powerful? Could I get the salad instead of fries, please? Done. No explanation needed. But we've been trained to believe that explaining ourselves makes us more reasonable, more likable, more human. And in some contexts it does, but in most contexts, it makes us look like we're seeking permission to exist. Drop a comment. What's something you always feel like you need to explain or justify? Because recognizing this pattern is the first step to breaking it. Tom, now here's where this gets practical. I'm not suggesting you become a cold, unfeeling robot. I'm suggesting you become selective about who gets access to your inner world. Machiavelli understood that there are essentially 2 types of people in the world. Those who have earned your transparency and those who haven't. Your closest friends, your family, your romantic partner, these people should get the real you. Your explanations, your vulnerabilities, your thought processes, that's intimacy. But your coworkers, acquaintances, strangers, people trying to manipulate you, they get the professional version. Polite, competent, but not completely accessible. Here's a perfect example. Last week, a colleague asked me why I don't stay for after-work drinks anymore. Old me would have launched into a detailed explanation about work-life balance, personal goals, health concerns, financial considerations. Nah, new me said, I've got other commitments now. That's it. No justification, no apology, no invitation for them to judge whether my reasons are valid. And you know what happened? They said, oh, okay, and changed the subject. Because when you don't make your decisions up for debate, people stop trying to debate them. But here's the really fascinating part. When you stop over-explaining yourself, something weird happens in your own psychology. You start making better decisions because you're no longer choosing based on what you can justify to others. You're choosing based on what actually serves you. I used to say yes to social events I didn't want to attend because I couldn't think of a good enough reason to say no. The reason I don't want to somehow didn't feel legitimate. But I don't want to is actually the most legitimate reason of all. It's your intuition, your energy levels, your personal preferences, all perfectly valid factors in how you spend your limited time on Earth. Once I gave myself permission to make decisions without having to justify them to everyone, I started making decisions that actually aligned with who I am instead of who I thought I should be. And that authenticity, that's what people really respect. Not the fake version of you that's been focus grouped to death, but the real version that makes choices based on internal conviction rather than external approval. There's a concept in psychology called internal locus of control versus external locus of control. People with internal locus of control believe their actions determine their outcomes. People with external locus of control believe outside forces determine their outcomes. But there's a third category that most people don't talk about. People with social locus of control. These are people who believe other people's opinions determine their outcomes. And that's where most nice people get trapped. We become so focused on managing other people's perceptions that we lose touch with our own authentic preferences. Think about it. How many decisions do you make in a day based on what you actually want versus what you think will make you look good to others? What job you choose, what clothes wear, what opinions you express, who you date, how you spend your free time, how much of that is really you, and how much of that is the version of you that you think will be most acceptable. I realized I had spent so much energy trying to be likable that I had no idea who I actually was underneath all that performance. Be honest in the comments. When was the last time you made a decision purely because it felt right to you? Not because you could explain it to others. Because this next part might sting a little. Low. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people who describe themselves as nice aren't actually nice. They're scared. They're scared of conflict, scared of disapproval, scared of being disliked, and they've learned that being accommodating is the path of least resistance. But true kindness comes from strength, not fear. It's choosing to be generous when you could just as easily choose not to be. It's helping someone because you want to, not because you're afraid of what they'll think if you don't. When you help people from a place of fear of their reaction, fear of their judgment, you're not being kind, you're being manipulative. You're trying to control their opinion of you through your behavior, and people can sense that. They can feel the difference between genuine kindness and fear-based people-pleasing. That's why the truly generous people in your life, the ones who help because they genuinely want to, command so much more respect than the people who help because they're afraid to say no. Machiavelli understood this distinction. He wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are." When your kindness comes from fear, people see right through it. But when your kindness comes from choice, when people know you could just as easily walk away but you're choosing to stay, that's when it has real power. Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah was one of those people everyone called so sweet and such a good person. She volunteered for everything, never missed a birthday, always remembered to ask about your problems. She was also completely miserable, overworked, underappreciated, and constantly resentful of all the people she was helping, who never seemed to help her back. Then her father got sick and something shifted. She had to prioritize. She couldn't be everything to everyone anymore because she had something more important to focus on. So she started saying no to social events, to extra work projects, to people who wanted her to listen to their problems for hours. She didn't explain herself, didn't apologize, just said, "I can't right now," and left it at that. And you know what happened? The people who really mattered in her life respected her boundaries completely. They understood she was going through something difficult, and they gave her space. But the people who had been using her, they got angry. They accused her of being selfish, of changing, of not caring about them anymore. That's when Sarah realized the truth about her relationships. Half of them weren't relationships at all. They were transactions. She provided emotional labor, they provided validation. When she stopped providing, they revealed their true nature. If you're recognizing yourself in Sarah's story, make sure you're subscribed, because we're about to dive into the specific steps to break this pattern. But first, let me show you what happened next. After about 6 months of prioritizing her father's care over everyone else's needs, Sarah noticed something incredible. The relationships that remained weren't just stronger, they were completely different. Her real friends started coming to her with more important conversations. Instead of gossiping or complaining, they wanted her advice on major life decisions. They respected her time because they knew it was limited. So they made sure their interactions with her actually mattered. Her coworkers stopped dumping extra work on her, but they also started including her in more strategic conversations. Because she was no longer the person who said yes to everything, when she did say yes, people knew it meant something. Even her romantic life changed. She stopped attracting people who wanted a caretaker and started attracting people who wanted a partner. That's the paradox of Machiavellian psychology. When you become less available, you become more valuable. When you become harder to access, people work harder to access you. Sarah didn't become mean or cold or manipulative. She just became selective, and selectivity is attractive. There's a principle in economics called artificial scarcity. It's why luxury brands limit production, why restaurants have waiting lists, why exclusive clubs have membership requirements. Scarcity creates desire. But here's what most people don't understand. The same principle applies to human psychology. When you're always available, always accommodating, always willing to explain yourself, you create the psychological equivalent of a clearance sale. People assume that if you're so easy to access, you must not be very valuable. But when you become selective about your time, your energy, your emotional availability, suddenly you become premium. Not because you're actually better than before, but because people have to work for your attention. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds manipulative. This sounds like playing games. And I get that concern, but here's the thing. Setting boundaries isn't manipulation. Having standards isn't playing games. Protecting your energy isn't being fake. What's manipulative is pretending to be happy when you're resentful. What's game playing is saying yes when you mean no, and then passive-aggressively punishing people for taking you at your word. Comment below. What's one boundary you've been afraid to set because you're worried about seeming mean? Because I'm about to show you how to set boundaries like a Machiavellian. All right, let's get tactical. How do you actually implement these principles without becoming a sociopath? First principle, never explain more than necessary. When someone asks you to do something you don't want to do, your answer should be complete in one sentence. I can't make it. That doesn't work for me. I'm not available. Done. Second principle, delay your responses. When someone asks you for something, don't respond immediately. Take time to consider whether you actually want to do it. This isn't playing hard to get. This is avoiding the trap of agreeing to things just because you can't think of a reason to say no in the moment. Third principle, make your yeses count. When you do agree to help someone or attend something, be fully present. Give them your complete attention. This way, when you say no to other things, people remember the quality of your yes. Fourth principle, never apologize for your boundaries. Sorry, I can't becomes I can't. I'm sorry, but that doesn't work for me becomes that doesn't work for me. You're not doing anything wrong by having limits. Fifth principle, embrace the uncomfortable silence. When someone tries to guilt you or pressure you after you've said no, don't fill the silence with explanations. Let them sit with your decision. But here's the advanced technique that most people never learn. It's what I call strategic vulnerability. See, the problem with being too open is that you give away your emotional power. But the problem with being too closed is that you seem inhuman. The solution is to be vulnerable strategically. You share your struggles, your fears, your authentic self, but only with people who have earned that level of access. And you do it on your terms, not as a response to pressure or manipulation. For example, instead of explaining why you can't work late by detailing your personal life to your boss, you might share your actual priorities with a close friend who genuinely cares about your well-being. Instead of defending your dating standards to acquaintances who think you're being too picky, you might have an honest conversation about what you're looking for with someone whose opinion you actually value. This way, you're not becoming emotionally unavailable. You're becoming emotionally selective. There's a massive difference. Emotional availability should be earned, not assumed. That's what Machiavelli understood about human nature. People don't value what comes easily. Remember Andrew from the beginning of this video? The guy who owned that business meeting with 3 words? I ended up working with him on a project a few months later, and I got to see his approach up close. It wasn't that he was smarter than everyone else, though he was pretty sharp. It wasn't that he was more experienced. Several people in our industry had been doing this longer. What Andrew understood was the power of strategic silence. He would sit in meetings and absorb information, really listen, take notes, ask 1 or 2 precise questions that cut right to the heart of the issue. While everyone else was trying to prove how much they knew by talking, Andrew was actually learning. And when he finally did speak, it was usually to point out something that everyone else had missed. But here's what I found most interesting. Outside of work, Andrew was actually incredibly warm and funny and generous. He wasn't a cold person. He was just professionally selective about when he engaged. That's when I realized that Machiavellian principles aren't about becoming a different person. They're about having different modes for different contexts. See, most people have one setting, completely open. They bring the same energy to every interaction, whether it's their best friend or a stranger trying to sell them something. But psychologically mature people understand that different relationships require different levels of access. Your inner circle gets your vulnerability. Your professional network gets your competence. Random people get your politeness. This isn't being fake. This is having boundaries. You don't owe everyone the same level of intimacy. Think about it in terms of your home. You have a front door, a living room, and a bedroom. Not everyone who comes to your house gets access to every room, right? Your mailman stays on the porch. Your coworkers might see the living room. Only your closest friends and family see the bedroom. Your psychological space should work the same way. But most people live their entire emotional life in the front yard, exposed to anyone who walks by. That's exhausting. No wonder so many people feel drained by social interaction. They're giving away intimate-level energy to acquaintance-level relationships. Drop a comment. What's one area of your life where you give everyone the same level of access instead of having appropriate boundaries? Because this next part will show you exactly how to fix it. Here's a simple system I developed for categorizing the people in my life. I call it the Access Levels Framework. Level 1, public. These are strangers, acquaintances, people you barely know. They get politeness, basic courtesy, surface-level conversation. Think cashiers, neighbors you wave to, people at networking events. Level 2, professional. Co-workers, clients, service providers you work with regularly. They get competence, reliability, friendly professionalism. You're helpful when appropriate, but you don't share personal details. Level 3, social. Friends, extended family, people you enjoy spending time with but aren't deeply close to. They get more of your personality, your humor, your opinions, but not your deepest struggles or fears. Level 4, intimate. Your closest friends, immediate family, romantic partner. They get vulnerability, emotional support, your authentic self, including your problems and insecurities. The key is this: people have to earn their way up levels. And if someone violates the trust of their current level, they get moved down, not up. Most people pleasers give level 4 access to level 1 and level 2 people. Then they wonder why they feel emotionally exhausted and taken advantage of. No, let me give you a concrete example of how this works. A few months ago, a level 2 person, a colleague, asked me to help her move apartments on a Saturday. Old me would have said yes immediately, then spent my entire weekend helping someone I barely knew outside of work, probably while secretly resenting the fact that she didn't even offer to pay for pizza. New me said, "I'm not available that weekend, but I know a great moving company if you want a referral." She was clearly disappointed, maybe even a little offended, but here's what happened next. A few weeks later, when I actually needed help with something work-related, she was incredibly generous with her time and expertise. By maintaining appropriate boundaries, I didn't destroy our relationship, I actually improved it. She learned that my time and energy weren't freely available to just anyone, which made her more invested in maintaining a good professional relationship with me. Meanwhile, when my level 4 friends needed help moving, I showed up with a truck and spent the entire day helping, because that's what intimate relationships involve: mutual support during difficult times. Same action, helping someone move, completely different contexts, completely different levels of investment. That's not being fake, that's being appropriately boundaried. Now, here's where this gets really interesting from a psychological perspective. When you start implementing these boundaries, you'll discover something about the people in your life that might shock you. Some people will respect your new boundaries immediately. They'll adapt to your new way of operating without complaint. These are psychologically healthy people who understand that relationships involve mutual respect. But others will push back, hard. They'll accuse you of changing, of being selfish, of not caring about them anymore. They might try to guilt you, manipulate you, or even threaten to end the relationship. And here's what you need to understand. These people are revealing their true nature. They weren't in relationship with you. They were in relationship with what you could do for them. When someone gets angry at you for having boundaries, they're essentially saying, "How dare you make it harder for me to take advantage of you?" That's not someone you want in your life anyway, but it's painful to discover, especially if you've known them for years. I lost several friendships when I started implementing these principles. People who I thought cared about me turned out to care more about what I could provide them. But the relationships that survived, they became incredibly strong, because now they're based on mutual choice rather than one-sided obligation. If this is resonating with you, smash that subscribe button, because we're about to dive into the most counterintuitive part of Machiavellian psychology, and it might completely change how you think about power dynamics. Here's something that blew my mind when I first understood it. Machiavelli wrote about 2 types of power: the power of the lion and the power of the fox. The lion uses force, aggression, direct confrontation. This is what most people think of when they hear Machiavellian, the loud, dominating, aggressive approach. But the fox uses cunning, strategy, psychological influence. The fox doesn't need to be the biggest or loudest in the room, because the fox understands something the lion doesn't. True power isn't about making people do what you want through force, True power is about making people want to do what you want through influence. And here's the kicker. In our modern world, fox power is infinitely more effective than lion power. Because lion power creates resistance. When you try to force people to do things, they push back. They sabotage. They comply publicly but rebel privately. But fox power creates willing cooperation. When people choose to follow you, they don't just obey, they become invested in your success. Think about the most influential people you know. Are they the ones who bark orders and demand compliance? Or are they the ones who somehow make you want to impress them, want to be in their inner circle, want to earn their approval? That's fox power, and it's terrifyingly effective. Let me show you how this works in practice. There's a woman I know, let's call her Elena, who runs a marketing agency. She has about 30 employees, and they would literally run through walls for her. Now, Elena isn't the highest paying boss in the industry. She's not the most technically skilled. She doesn't offer the best benefits package. But her employees are more loyal than people making twice as much at other companies. How does she do it? She uses what I call strategic scarcity with her approval. Elena doesn't praise everyone for everything. When she gives you positive feedback, you know you actually earned it. She doesn't have regular one-on-ones with everyone. If Elena asks to meet with you privately, it means you're either in trouble or being considered for something important. Either way, you have her complete attention. She doesn't explain every decision to everyone. If Elena makes a strategic choice for the company, she announces it and moves on. She doesn't justify it, defend it, or ask for consensus. She just leads. And you know what happens? Her employees trust her judgment completely. Because they've learned that when Elena makes a decision, it's based on information and considerations they might not have access to. That's fox power. She's not ruling through fear or intimidation. She's ruling through earned respect and strategic mystique. Comment below, have you ever worked for someone who had this kind of natural authority? What did they do differently? Because understanding this pattern will change how you approach every relationship. Here's what Elena understands about human psychology that most leaders miss. People don't actually want complete transparency and total equality. That sounds nice in theory, but in practice, it creates anxiety. When everyone knows everything and everyone's opinion carries equal weight, nobody feels secure. There's no clear hierarchy, no clear decision maker, no clear person to follow when things get complicated. Humans are tribal creatures. We're hardwired to look for leaders, to follow people who seem to know what they're doing, to feel safe in hierarchies where our role is clearly defined. Elena provides that security by being selectively mysterious. Her employees don't need to know every detail of every decision. They just need to trust that she's making good decisions on their behalf. And that trust is earned through consistency, competence, and the occasional glimpse behind the curtain that makes them feel special. For example, Elena might pull aside a high-performing employee and say, I want to get your thoughts on something I'm considering for next quarter. Not because she needs their permission, but because she's strategically sharing her thought process with someone who's earned that level of access. That employee leaves that conversation feeling valued, trusted, and more invested in Elena's success. They're not just following orders anymore. They're part of the inner circle. Now I want to share something personal. When I started implementing these principles in my own life, the changes weren't immediate. In fact, the first few months were pretty uncomfortable. See, when you've spent years being the person everyone can count on for everything, changing that pattern creates some social turbulence. People notice, they comment, they test your new boundaries to see if they're real. I remember the first time I said no to a social event without giving a detailed explanation. My friend kept pushing, but why? What are you doing instead? Is everything okay? Are you mad at me? And every instinct I had was screaming at me to explain, to reassure, to make her feel better about my decision. But I didn't. I just said, I can't make it, but I hope you have fun. And then I sat with the discomfort of her disappointment without trying to fix it. It felt terrible in the moment. I was convinced I was being mean, selfish, a bad friend. But you know what happened? Nothing. The world didn't end. Our friendship didn't collapse. She went to the event, had a good time, and never brought it up again. That's when I realized how much energy I had been wasting on managing other people's emotions about my decisions, energy that I could have been using to actually live my life. But here's the really profound part. Once I stopped trying to control how people felt about my choices, I started making better choices. When you're constantly worried about justifying your decisions to others, you start making decisions based on what you can defend rather than what you actually want. I was choosing restaurants based on what would make everyone happy instead of what I wanted to eat. I was choosing career opportunities based on what sounded impressive to others instead of what actually excited me. I was even choosing how to spend my free time based on what would make me seem like a good person rather than what would actually recharge me. Once I gave myself permission to make choices without having to justify them to everyone, my entire life became more aligned with who I actually am. And you know what's funny? People started respecting my decisions more, not less. Because when someone makes choices from a place of internal conviction rather than external approval seeking, those choices carry more weight. There's an authenticity to decisions made from internal authority that people can sense, even if they can't articulate it. But let me be real with you about something. This transformation isn't all positive. There are losses, and some of them hurt. When I stopped being the person who said yes to everything, I lost my role as the group coordinator. You know, the person who plans all the gatherings, remembers everyone's birthdays, makes sure everyone feels included. And for a while, some of my social groups just fell apart because I had been the person holding them together through sheer effort. And when I stopped providing that energy, there wasn't enough genuine connection to sustain the relationships. That was painful to discover. I thought these people were my friends, but it turned out they were my beneficiaries. They liked what I did for them, but they didn't really know who I was underneath all that service. But here's what I learned from that experience. Relationships that are held together by one person's disproportionate effort aren't really relationships, they're charity projects. And when you stop being everyone's unpaid life coordinator, you create space for relationships that are actually reciprocal. The people who stayed in my life after I stopped overfunctioning, those are my real friends. The ones who valued my company, not just my contributions. Be honest in the comments. Are you the overfunctioner in your friend group? The one who does all the planning and organizing? Because what I'm about to tell you might be uncomfortable. Here's something nobody talks about. Being the overfunctioner in relationships is actually a form of control. I know that sounds harsh, but hear me out. When you're the person who plans everything, coordinates everything, remembers everything, you're not just being helpful, you're making yourself indispensable. And making yourself indispensable is a way of ensuring that people need you, even if they don't particularly want you. Think about it. If you're the only one who knows everyone's schedules, who keeps track of all the logistics, who makes all the reservations, what happens if you disappear? The whole system falls apart. That's not love or friendship. That's dependency. And deep down, you know it. That's why overfunctioners are often so resentful. They're working incredibly hard to maintain relationships that wouldn't exist without their constant effort. Real relationships don't require that level of maintenance. Real relationships are sustained by mutual enjoyment, shared values, genuine affection, not by one person's heroic efforts to keep everyone connected. When I stopped being the social coordinator, I lost some groups, but I gained something much more valuable. I learned who actually wanted to spend time with me versus who just appreciated what I did for them. This reminds me of something that happened about a year into my Machiavellian transformation. I got invited to a dinner party by someone I barely knew, a friend of a friend situation. Old me would have showed up with a bottle of wine, helped with the cooking, stayed late to help clean up, and probably sent a thank you text the next day with photos from the evening. New me showed up on time, brought nothing but good conversation, left when I felt like leaving, and sent no follow-up messages. And you know what happened? The host contacted me a few days later to invite me to something else, not because I had been helpful or accommodating, but because I had been genuinely present during the conversations we had. She remembered what I said, not what I did. She was interested in my perspectives, not my service. For the first time in years, someone wanted to see me again because of who I was, not what I provided. That's when I understood the difference between being liked and being respected. Being liked often means being useful. Being respected means being valued for your inherent qualities. And respect, unlike likability, doesn't require you to constantly prove your worth through actions. Now, let me teach you something that most people never learn about social dynamics. It's what I call strategic unpredictability. Most people are completely predictable in their social patterns. They always say yes to the same types of invitations. They always react the same way to the same triggers. They always respond to messages within the same time frame. But predictable people become background noise. People stop paying attention to them because they know exactly what to expect. Strategic unpredictability means occasionally doing something that surprises people in a good way. Sometimes you show up to something unexpected. Sometimes you decline something you normally would attend. Sometimes you respond immediately. Sometimes you take your time. The key word here is occasionally. You're not being chaotic or unreliable. You're being selectively surprising. This keeps people slightly off balance around you, which maintains their attention and interest. They can't quite categorize you, which means they have to keep paying attention to figure you out. For example, I used to always be the first person to respond to group chats. People started ignoring my messages because they knew I'd always be there with immediate input. Now, sometimes I respond right away. Sometimes I wait hours. Sometimes I don't respond at all if I don't have anything valuable to add. And suddenly, when I do contribute to conversations, people actually pay attention. This works because of something psychologists call intermittent reinforcement. It's the same principle that makes gambling addictive. When rewards come at unpredictable intervals, they create much stronger psychological conditioning than rewards that come consistently. Think about it. If a slot machine paid out every time, it wouldn't be exciting. If it never paid out, people would stop playing. But because it pays out occasionally and unpredictably, people become obsessed. The same principle applies to attention and approval in relationships. When you're always available, always responsive, always accommodating, people take you for granted. But when your attention and approval are valuable because they're not guaranteed, suddenly people work harder to earn them. This isn't about being manipulative or playing games. It's about understanding that scarcity creates value, and value creates respect. The most charismatic people I know aren't charismatic because they're always on. They're charismatic because when they do engage fully, it feels special. Comment below, who's the most charismatic person you know, and what makes them that way? I bet it's not what you initially think. All right, we're coming to the end of this deep dive, and I want to leave you with the most important insight from everything we've covered. Machiavellian psychology isn't about becoming a different person. It's about becoming the most strategic version of yourself. You don't have to stop being kind. You just have to be kind strategically. You don't have to stop being helpful. You just have to be helpful selectively. You don't have to stop caring about people. You just have to care about the right people in the right ways. The goal isn't to become cold or manipulative or cruel. The goal is to become someone whose kindness has weight because it's chosen, not compulsive. When you stop giving away your energy to anyone who asks for it, you have more energy to give meaningfully to the people who deserve it. When you stop explaining yourself to people who haven't earned that level of access, you have more authentic conversations with people who have. When you stop being available to everyone, you become more present for the relationships that actually matter. So here's what I want you to do. Pick one area of your life where you're currently overfunctioning. Maybe it's at work, maybe it's in your friend group, maybe it's in your family. For the next week, practice strategic withdrawal in that area. Say no to one thing you would normally say yes to. Don't explain a decision you would normally justify. Leave one conversation before you feel like you've given enough, and pay attention to what happens. Not just to other people's reactions, but to your own internal experience. I guarantee you'll discover something about yourself and your relationships that you never noticed before. If this video changed how you think about power dynamics and relationships, you need to subscribe to this channel right now, because we're just getting started with exploring the psychology of influence, attraction, and social dynamics. Hit that notification bell too, because the algorithms of human psychology are far more complex and fascinating than any social media algorithm, and understanding them will give you an unfair advantage in every area of your life. And if you want to dive even deeper into these concepts, check out the video I made about why mysterious people are more attractive. It's the perfect companion to everything we just covered. Remember, becoming more strategic in your relationships isn't about caring less about people. It's about caring more about yourself. And when you care enough about yourself to have boundaries, standards, and strategic thinking, you become someone worth caring about. The world doesn't need more people pleasers. The world needs more people who know their worth and aren't afraid to act like it. So stop being the person everyone can count on for everything, and start being the person everyone respects for something.